in some of the Trump cases that are not that level yet. One, we do have the court taking on the efforts of state governments, both Florida and Texas, trying to control the ability of social media to censor viewpoints they don't like. Okay? And in both states, they enacted laws that said no, that there's certain viewpoints you can't censor based upon what the government thought should be given free speech protection. In one case, a court of appeals said that's unconstitutional, invades the free speech rights of somebody to decide what they want to promote and not. And the other case, the court of appeals said no, it was constitutional. And the U.S. Supreme Court has taken this case. It obviously has momentous implications for social media. There's a general proposition that the court has announced that you have a right not to associate with speech, just like you have a right to associate with speech. The famous case on New Hampshire, they required you to have a license plate that said, live free or die, and the court said you can't force that. But then go back, I'll speed up here. It's possible that the court would interject itself in many of the pending cases now that are percolating in the state courts, trying to disqualify Trump from being on the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I think the court will say, we want to sit this one out and let it percolate below.
And we'll return after these.
Child abuse scandal in modern history. The only thing I could do was to have some signs made and go outside. Over the last few years, Billboard Chris, as he's commonly known, has had conversations about gender ideology with tens of thousands of people on the streets and cities across North America. He's also been assaulted by gender activists close to 40 times. In one case, his arm was broken. The actual cure, historic, for gender dysphoria is puberty itself. These puberty blockers combined with the cross-sex hormones are sterilizing children. Thousands of autistic kids on body. I mean, it's such a simple idea and such a conversation starter, apparently. Tell me about that. Yeah, so I have that one. I have children cannot consent to puberty blockers, which I wear most of the time as well. And our kids are being taught that they might have been born wrong. I've actually altered my message a little more recently. I've kind of dropped the wrong body part, because I think sometimes when you say children are never born in the wrong body, people get confused a little bit. They need to think about that. So I've shortened it to just children are never born wrong, because people understand that right away. What are we doing teaching children that they need to be something they're not? Because at the very core of gender ideology, that is exactly what is being taught to our kids. This is almost like a quasi-religious movement where they're led to believe they have a gendered soul, that somewhere on the inside they have this gender identity that doesn't match their biological sex. And it's complete nonsense. The whole theory of gender identity is nonsense. All a gender identity is a personality. So I have this expression, there are two sexes, zero genders, and infinite personalities, because I think that sums us all up. And we'd all be better off as a society if we just got rid of this word gender altogether. Where did the idea come from to wear a billboard? So I started learning about what I consider to be the greatest child abuse scandal in modern medicine history, this business of giving kids puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries to modify their body to appear more like the opposite sex. I started learning about this in 2019. I came across this term puberty blockers, and so I started reading about this. And of course, these drugs are doing exactly what they say. They're blocking puberty in children. I'm a dad of two girls. At that time, they were 7 and 9 years old. They're 11 and 14 now. But I started researching this, and all throughout 2020, I was reading every night about all of this stuff. It gets worse the more you read. And then in July of 2020, a woman in the UK named Kelly J. Keane, or Posey Parker, a lot of people know her as, she put up a very controversial sign at the Edinburgh train station that said, "I heart J.K. Rowling." I love J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, because, of course, J.K. Rowling has spoken out against the assault on women's rights and, of course, this child abuse as well. And that sign only lasted a day because some people on Twitter complained that it was hate speech for that. This is the theory of the radical left. So it's a one-way street. It's okay to say you're trans. It's not okay to object to harming your child with these experimental drugs and surgeries and help them feel comfortable with their sex. So yeah, that's a criminal offense now. Good luck prosecuting it. They haven't prosecuted anybody. And I don't anticipate them trying that anytime soon, because for me, I think the real purpose of this bill is just to scare people. It's to silence them, and it works. It's silenced the whole therapeutic profession. Most counselors won't even talk to these kids anymore. I get parents contacting me saying, Chris, I can't find a counselor in British Columbia, or even from the United States. I have this email from a mom recently in the entire state of Washington. She couldn't find a counselor. So she came to me looking for help. I probably know 3 people across Canada who will talk to these kids. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands of kids in North America who've been diagnosed now with gender dysphoria.
When I first heard about you, I was under the impression that one of your daughters had somehow gotten caught up in this, and that was your motivation, right? And then I kind of learned a little more through some mutual friends and so forth. But the second question I have is, you know, it's one thing to have a strong idea, it's another thing to back it with money, which clearly you did. You're putting up big billboards. It doesn't come cheaply. People might think, you know, there's some kind of, you know, dark money funding Chris, right? So how does this work?
Yeah, you know, I'm getting by these days. People donate through my website, $30, $50. That's literally how I'm kind of getting by. I did run up some debt for quite a while, and I was running up my credit cards and then working to pay them off.
But because it was that important to you.
Yeah, I don't care about money. Obviously, we have to take care of ourselves, and I need to take care of my kids, but money's never been a driver. There's always been this deeper part of me that is concerned about the world we live in. And so that remains. And I don't think I'm going to get into it all today, but I've had some unique experiences in my life, and I've actually, I've had some bad luck, and I've had a lot of suffering. And so I think that gives you a different perspective on life. I didn't care about all the abuse that I knew was going to come my way, because I know who I am. My wife and kids know who I am. And that's all that matters, honestly. Anyone else can say whatever they want. Now these hit pieces that get written about me, sometimes I retweet them myself. I don't care. And just for fun and to show them that it doesn't bother me, because that's what they're trying to do.
What about your daughters and your wife? How
Today, there's been a rise in these types of calls during the last few years. So the agency has proposed the Telephone Consumer Protection Act include voice cloning technology used in common robocall scams. The FCC's announcement comes after a robocall with an AI voice resembling President Biden targeted thousands of New Hampshire voters. The FCC said in the release that AI technology now has the potential to confuse consumers with misinformation by imitating voices of celebrities, political candidates, and family members.
The head of the National Transportation Safety Board says investigators are almost done with a preliminary report on the door plug blowout on a Boeing 737 MAX 9. This
decision that really halted the government from or controlling social media platforms' commodity rates.
It involves communicating with White House officials, various executive entities like the CDC and FBI, and social media companies. Big Pharma and the government will begin to haggle over the prices of the costliest drugs for millions of older adults. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Service will present an opening offer to drug makers today on each of the prices of 10 medications. They include drugs used to treat heart disease, certain cancers, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and other conditions. Mandated by the Inflation Reduction Act, it marks the first time that Medicare has been able to negotiate with drug manufacturers over prices. The negotiations are set to last through August 1st. Final prices are set to be announced September 1st, but they won't go into effect until 2026. Pharmaceutical companies are pushing back, calling the negotiations unconstitutional. The Biden administration is facing several lawsuits over the program.
And the Federal Communications Commission wants to make robocalls generated by artificial.
That's our slogan, Rein in Big Tech.
You know, it's staggering what you're talking about, and it's really atrocious and it's outrageous. You can give so many adjectives to this, but the bottom line is, based on what you're telling us, our children, our country's future, are in trouble. I want to take a break so that people can digest this, and when we come back, Donna, on the other side of the break, I'd like you to talk to me about some possible solutions to prevent this kind of atrocity from happening to our children. That today, look, I don't know you personally, Donna, but I think that because you're a champion of trying to help children, you would have hoped that people would have joined on with you so that all of you can work your way out of a job and say, hey, everything's okay for our children in America now. But it hasn't happened. Why?
No, it hasn't, and that's a great point. For a number of reasons. If you look at how to make the internet safer for children, we proposed back in the 90s, and we're still working off this model today. That is, it takes a shared responsibility, everybody doing their part, okay? So parents have got to be educated, equipped, and empowered, but all of the burden pretty much has fallen on them most of this time. So we do a lot of work there, and we talk about what parents need to know and what they can do as we get towards the end of this interview. But the other is corporate responsibility and accountability. As I talked about in the beginning, the internet started as anything goes, completely open, all right? And even though Congress passed laws in the early 90s, I was part of all of this, most of them, in fact, all but one was struck down at the Supreme Court. The internet was so new. We were trying to extend laws that protected children from all the stuff we've been talking about to the internet, okay? So Congress took action, but the Supreme Court didn't uphold some of these laws. I think by and large, they didn't really understand it that much at the time. Then social media comes into this, okay? So all this time, these businesses and these companies have developed their technologies as the internet has evolved, but have not factored in safety as a driver, all right? We call that safety by design or safer by design. So now they're having to pull it all back. You know, after you've already invented the wheel, how do we make the wheel safe, so to speak? Which is kind of hard. And that's what we're dealing with right now.
So I've got to ask you, have any of these corporations, knowing that you're out there on the front lines, have any of them come to you for advice or even consultation about how they can regulate themselves and better safeguard our children? Just as you've mentioned, and rightly so, some of the CEOs of these companies will never let their children touch social media until they're 18 years old. A few of them have reported.
Right. Well, over the years, we have worked with some of the tech companies. And let me just say this, Enough is Enough has been joined. When we started, there were 2 NGOs. Now there are hundreds of NGOs. Why? Because you've got this pandemic of problems from...
Not good at all.